So what
Yeah.
exactly is this drop it like it's hot that you speak of? Like I'm a little lost. Maybe
We'll talk about that on a new call, Christopher.
I gotta set up another call about dropping hotness.
Yeah,
Is that what we're doing?
dropping it like it's hot when it comes to diversity and equity and inclusion.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christopher with Eventful Conversations, and I'm joined today by Hilary and Antwone to break down the idea of inclusion within the events industry. Hilary Laney is the owner and CEO of Evia Events, a gender equity certified business providing products and services for event planners, which makes their events more accessible. Antwone Stigall is Chief Events Officer for Antwone Stigall Company, an experiential events management firm and events partner with Andreessen Horowitz. Antwone is also the former chair for MPI's Diversity and Inclusion Committee and the instructor for their Inclusive Event Strategist Certificate Program. Bringing people together is at the heart of every event. So you would think that the idea of inclusion should never not be top of mind. However, lately it has been so easily lumped together with diversity and equity that it is seldom addressed as a standalone idea. So we're here today to talk about inclusion and broaden the thoughts of what inclusion means and why it's so important. First, I'd love to have each of you share a little bit more about yourselves and tell us why you feel that this conversation is so important. Hilary, would you like to kind of head us off?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Christopher, for the great introduction. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. This is kind of at the core of who I am. A lot of what I do in my own business is related to this. I really try hard and strive to build an environment at my company where inclusion is at the forefront of what we do as a culture and a team. And having been in the event space for the past, I think I'm coming up on 17 years here, I worked a lot with the tech companies. And so I've been in many situations where, I'm the only woman really on site at the event. And in my younger years, as I was sort of building my career, I didn't realize how much of an impact it had on me. But as I started to sort of gain my confidence and my wherewithal and realizing that it had an impact on the way that I showed up every day. And so it's just as I've grown and learned more about what's important to me and my values, and I've sort of done that through my career and work and being part of the event industry. And I've recognized the need that's out there to create a more inclusive experience with the events. So I'm doing everything I can to, use my business and my voice, really conversations like this, to raise awareness and help, move the needle a little bit. So it's an honor to be part of this conversation today.
Antwone, would you like to share a little bit of why you're in this conversation with us?
Absolutely. Much like Hilary, I agree. It's an honor to be a part of this conversation. And why this is so important to me is because just like Hilary, I've been in spaces where it's just been Antwone, a young Black male trying to make it out here in this world. And that's not always comfortable. So, I'm striving now to make sure that I, as an event professional who plan lots of experiences, build out experiences that are inclusive and always thinking about, who's not having access to this, who is not included at this table. How can we get them here? How can we make them feel welcome? And for me, it's actually a joy to do that work. And I think it's important that we're having these conversations because often so many times people make this conversation a very eggshell type conversation, like they don't really want to enter into it. They find it hard. I think it's a fun conversation because it's a conversation where you can continuously learn and continuously grow. And I love to learn and grow. And so that's why I'm always up for conversations like this. They can get heated sometimes, but at the end of the day, if you enter into that conversation with a growth mindset and a love mindset, you're going to have fun with it.
No, absolutely. It's energizing. This last week I hopped on the call with both of you guys a little bit, and I had to share with you guys how it invigorated me just even having these conversations and talking about things that are so important. Even when I'm not, even awake half the morning. So it definitely is energizing to say the least. But let me ask you this question. So how would you guys actually define inclusion? Let's just break it down. I want to kind of separate inclusion from D&I, and this is focus on inclusion, right? How would you define just inclusion in general?
Hillary,
Well,
after you.
it's so funny because Christopher, I too loved our kind of prep conversation for this, and you stumped me on this one because I kept like I kept saying the word inclusion in my definition, but I think I've thought a lot about this actually since you said that, because I talk about it all the time, but really for me it's so simple. It's just creating opportunities for people who want to be involved, need to be involved, that they feel that invitation, that they feel like they can be part of the discussion, part of the experience. And I think the onus is on the group or the individual who's creating that experience to create that environment and to go step outside probably of their own comfort zones and the way they've been doing things, and find those ways to reach out and make others feel included that may have felt excluded beforehand. That's really what it's about for me and what we try to do.
It's so fun. It's so funny, Hillary. That's not where Chris stumped me this past week when he asked me some questions. And pretty much, I agree with everything you say when it comes to inclusion. I think about all the different, like if I look at a table and all the people look the same, then it's not inclusive. So I start to think about who could be included at this. And so I think about different backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses, different races, different people with abilities. Like, how can we make this table look like the world that we actually live in? I don't want to be Shirley Chisholm where I have to go and bring my own chair. Let's just build a bigger table and put some more chairs there. So that's how I think about inclusion.
I love that.
You don't really think about it, but there's been years where I've gone to the events and it really hasn't been top of mind. I don't, just a lot I don't think about. I'm like, thinking about the food, thinking about, people enjoying themselves, and it's easy not to recognize some of those things that, aren't really right in front of us. But then they ask this another question. So why is it so important? Like we know now you defined inclusion. Why is inclusion so important? Outside of just being a feel-good thing to do, or it just seems like the right thing, right?
I'll jump in first here. I think inclusion is important because when you are being exclusive, you're missing out on some amazing things. So inclusion of thought, like if you just have a Christopher, a Antwone, and a Hilary in the room all the time, we think different. But at some point when we're always coming together, we start to think the same. We start to answer questions and do things the same. So I think it's important that you always have that conglomeration, that mix of different types of people and perspectives and resources and all of those things, because they make your products better if you're building products. They make your experiences better if you're building experiences. If you're just trying to have a freaking conversation, it even just makes that better. That's why for me, inclusion is super important. And when you're not doing it, you're missing out on so many colorful things that you can add to the situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, for me, where it's rooted from the beginning is as I took more of a leadership role in my organization, and eventually, I bought it a few years ago, and so it's my business, and it's important to me that my values are reflected in the way we manage things. So that extends out into my leadership team and thinking about the way we hire people. I mean, just every process, everything that we do. And the way I kind of look at it is inclusion is sort of step one to reaching equity, where in order for you to get to where that end zone, that place where everybody's got an equal opportunity, we talk about this stuff all the time, but to do that, you've got to start with including everyone in the conversation. So kind of like what you're saying, Antwone, of like, that needs to happen. And that sort of sets the foundation and the tone for everything beyond that, because then you can start, then you can create diversity, right? Then you can make sure that everyone's represented at the table. And then that moves on to, now how do we make sure that all of these people are being heard and represented in the ways that we're conducting business, the way we're planning the events? I mean, the list goes on, all of our activities, right? So I know in my organization, that's sort of like step one, is how do we include people in it first? And then we can tackle these other things that we're trying to do.
Absolutely. I feel like by being inclusive all the time, and that's at the root of your core and your DNA, you are by definition diverse. So people miss that. So you should diversify first and then start to include. But when you start to diversify first and you're not really taking that effort to include people, then people start to feel excluded because I'm in this space, but I don't have a voice. I can't vote on anything. I don't make the same pay everyone makes. And so they start to, that's where that misstep comes. And then you start to create all these different tensions. So yeah, spot on, Hilary. Thank you for doing that with your organization.
No, and I love the fact that you talk about starting with inclusion first, because I got to be honest with you. I always feel like diversity has always been a part of who I've been forever, right? I don't think it's always been on top of mind, but I don't think I've always never really not been inclusive in many cases. And when you mentioned that comment about when you're inclusive to start off with, by default you're going to be diverse, and I just love that idea. Like when you said that, I was like, it's so simple. It keeps it so, and then it just makes everything kind of fall into place so much more naturally, right? I mean, it was one of my favorite takeaways from you so far.
Yeah, and I think the challenge with tackling diversity first, because I feel like that's what we've been doing for so long. I feel like that has been sort of the focus of diversity, like it's not, I don't want to say it's an easy go-to, but there's no action really with that. Whereas inclusion, I think, Christopher, you and I talked about this in our prep conversation of like, it's an invitation, right? And so there's like an action automatically associated with inclusion. Whereas diversity is like, okay, but what does that mean? Like, how do we create that? Like, there's got to be an action to make that happen, because you can't expect that you're going to get diversity just by putting it out there and automatically you're going to get a diverse response from that. That's not necessarily the case, right?
I was like, Hilary, you touched on something. Someone's, I don't know if it was me or someone way in the past when I was first starting this journey, but they talk about diversity and inclusion in terms of diversity is being invited to the dance, but inclusion is being asked to dance. And I always think about that, like, who are we asking to get on the dance floor with us and boogie down? Like, really, like, drop it like it's hot if you want to go there. And so I think about that when we're talking about, diversity and inclusion and the different tables and spaces and experiences that we're creating.
So what exactly is this drop it like it's hot that you speak of? Like, I'm a little lost. Maybe
we'll talk about that on a new call, Christopher.
I gotta set up another call about dropping hotness. Is that what we're doing?
Dropping it like it's hot when it comes to diversity and equity and inclusion.
Well, what I love is, you talk about, asking people to dance. And I think that, and I'm going to touch on this in a bit too, about, how do we become more, because I think sometimes we feel like, okay, let's open up the door. Let's unlock the door and let people in, right? So, I'm going to tell my staffing crew that when I recruit people, we're going to start looking to be intentional about hiring people of, different backgrounds, different colors, different genders, things of that nature, right? But a lot of times I'll hear from people in HR say, yeah, but they just don't come through the door. Or, we have an organization and it looks very much this way, but I can't help who comes and attends these meetings. They got to come. But then I always ask, like, there's a difference between opening the door and having it unlocked versus actually inviting people to come through the door, and maybe even taking a step further and saying, hey, this is what I value about you that we want to have you bring to our party, I guess you can say. So what are some ways that we can be a little bit more intentional with this?
I think it starts with if you are trying to be intentional about being inclusive and then by definition becoming diverse, is taking a hard look at what your organization, what your event, your experience, any of those things truly look like. What are you lacking? Does it represent the world that we walk into when we walk outside of our homes every day? And if your answer is, well, I don't have this and I don't have that, then it's time to start figuring out how can we be more inclusive. Who are we? How can we find those pipelines and those channels to bring in the people to create this world of diversity? How can we make sure that we're creating an experience that makes them feel welcome? Because I can show up to your event, but if I don't feel welcome, then you're not being inclusive. So you're just inviting me to the space, and then you probably have created some tension there, which means that I now am going to leave that space and go, they are not inclusive. They'll invite you, but you won't get the same treatment that everyone else is getting. So I think that's the first step, is like really taking a hard look at what does it look like right now and what do we want that to look like 6 months from now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think marketing plays a huge role in that. I think really taking a look at your marketing strategy and what communities are you reaching out to? How are you representing your event? Just even from, I mean, something even just as, and this is, just one example, but just even something as simple as like the people in your imagery, or in your, if you're using I know a lot of companies are using like caricatures and things like that. I mean, it's like, even just that alone is more inviting, because you want to feel like it's relatable. I mean, your interests, common interests, what types of conversations are going to be happening? Does it pertain to me? How am I going to be included? Because you're right. Like, I'm not going to want to attend, for example, right? So being a woman in the tech space, I think it's improved a lot more recently. But in the earlier days, I didn't feel comfortable. I mean, I didn't feel like my voice was going to be heard, or that I didn't even necessarily have any excitement around seeing just white middle-aged man after white middle-aged man getting on stage. And it's like, but where's my voice in any of that? I'm not this, I can't relate to this. It was always hard to find, mentors and leaders to look up to. And I think, creating, it kind of starts with that strategy of the marketing and representing your event the right way, your speakers, your panel discussions, all that stuff, the content. It's like being super intentional about each of those elements, so that when you take a step back, you're looking at it from the different perspectives and making sure that those perspectives being represented, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and to add to that, Hilly, with that strategy is, once you've gotten that marketing piece like down pat, figure out where can we then partner with other organizations, other entities that can then start to build out this look of diversity, so that we can then really, really implement the inclusion that we've been talking about. You have organizations where it's pretty much all one type of community, and then you have another organization. It's the same way. When those come together, then you start to really work on that active diversity. So I completely agree with that strategy, and then adding on that partnership piece.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I'll say, like on the business side, we went through a gender equity certification. And one of the things, the first time when we went through it, we actually didn't get certified, because all of our policies and practices, especially around hiring, were not where they should be. And one of the things that we implemented was a blind application process. So which took some work. I mean, we really had to think through like who's involved in that process and how do we implement it. So it's not to say that there isn't additional effort that needs to be put forward with these things. But it's understanding what those actions are that you can do that are more intentional to really make that possible. Because I think now it's just sort of like, okay, let's just check the box. But in order to really make the difference and really make the impact, you have to work a little bit harder at it, and potentially implement some new ways of doing things.
Now, I was going to say, not only figuring out how to, what you just said, Hilary, but you have to also plan financially for it, because you can't just work hard and expect for this diversity to happen because it's going to happen. It's going to be like, no, you have to actually like budget to make things more inclusive and more diverse. Because when I think about it from an event planner standpoint, it's easy for me not to get ramps for for an event, and then I'm excluding people who use wheelchairs. It's going to take some money to get those ramps. I mean, one, I wouldn't even book in a venue who doesn't have ADA, who isn't ADA compliant. But if you just so happen to take that route because this venue is unique and it's beautiful and it does this for the thematic programming of an event, you got to spend that money to get those ramps. You probably have to spend that money to get those additional modes of transportation that are accessible to those people who use wheelchairs. So it's hard work, and it takes some finances to make those things happen as well.
Yeah.
But I think it's crazy. You talk about, it does take work though to try to force ourselves to see what we're typically blind to, right? You talked about, doing the application as a blind application where it's so hard to try to get things on our radar that we're not normally thinking about.